Hello everybody, it's Paul from Scott Family Amazeum. I am here in Fayetteville at Pinpoint.
That's right.
Pinpoint, the only pinball bar in Northwest Arkansas.
We're number one.
Arkansas.
We're number one.
Number one.
And only one.
That's right. I'm here with Bo Counts. Bo is the owner here. He is the pinball wizard with a twist here in Northwest Arkansas because obviously they have a bar, so
yes, that's true.
There is a twist. Well, we've been doing a series on makers in the real world, tinkerers in the real world. One thing we want to do at the Amazeum is to show how those skills that kids can learn when they're in the tinkering hub or when they're doing some of our other experiences, that they translate out into the real world in ways you don't normally think about. We tend to think of science, technology, engineering, art, and math as science, technology, engineering, art, and math, and they don't really...
The overlap is not always as obvious as you'd think.
Exactly. So we've been looking for places like Pinpoint where they overlap in a really unique way.
And underneath everyone's noses, most people don't realize when they walk in how much science and technology is going on behind the scenes. I mean, it's always a living, breathing place. We're getting deliveries right now, trying to reopen. But it's something that every day we're chasing down a problem. We're fixing a transistor, finding a burnt diode, and people are like, what are these things? Aren't they just machines that work constantly, perfectly all the time? Absolutely not, especially when they become antiques. And most of these are antiques. You're talking 20 to 30 years old on average, all of our games. And they look new. They look new. Yeah,
they keep in great shape. The one interesting thing that I realized on the way here was that, they're essentially gravity fed. I mean, it's gravity and Newton's laws that are making a pinball machine actually function. You're putting something into motion, and it will stay in motion until it hits something else.
I mean, inertia at its core.
Exactly.
And, a pinball is actually, it's a steel ball bearing, very heavy. And it's traveling at speeds of 10 to 15 miles an hour, and, it's a physics game. And unlike a video game that they have to try and use algorithms to predict physics, this is actual physics. And it is an object that is bouncing around. You have to have different tension strengths of rubbers, different steel strengths of posts, certain kinds of polymers in your plastic to resist breakage, and angles of ramps. You're using geometry to figure out how to get that ball with its own momentum to come back down and continue the game. And it's very complex.
That's sort of like a roller coaster for a ball bearing.
Exactly. It's the most elaborate Rube Goldberg machine that people actually have a purpose for. It's so insane how much science, engineering, woodworking, art, design, game theory goes into something that someone puts a couple of quarters in and goes beep beep beep. That was fun. Yeah. And it's amazing.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the art because a lot of times that's what draws people right away to a pinball machine or any kind of mechanical or electronic game is the art. So how's the art evolved in pinball over the last few years?
Well, it's really interesting because in the the early days of pinballs, when the 1950s, 60s were really breaking on the scene, there weren't movie tie-ins. One of the things we see a lot when people come to play pinball, they're like, "Oh, I've never heard of that movie," and it's like, well, it's not a movie, or they only want to play a game that they've heard of, like Star Wars or Back to the Future. But with the art in the heyday of pinball, it took artists and designers to come up with these ideas of like what would make a fun journey and a fun game in this box with this confined space that we can tell through the traveling of a steel ball bearing. And with a game like Funhouse, which is a very legendary game which we have here, it's this story of trying to stay after hours in a circus funhouse, and you are kind of being put on the spot and being chased by Rudy, this talking marionette who's trying to get you out of it, and his head's there, and it's a whole mechanical nightmare of trying to keep functioning. But using that ball and using art and using storytelling with the play field and all of the things that they use, it immerses the player into this world of this game without having to rely on graphics and 3D rendering like most games do now.
Yeah, but you mentioned mechanical and electronic. So what are some of the differences between an electronic pinball machine
Absolutely.
and a mechanical pinball machine?
So there are two very distinct eras of pinball. And the second era splits into subgenres, as most things do, but there was electromechanical and solid state. Electromechanical is primarily switches and relays. The sounds were generated by bells getting struck. The traditional ones you see on TV were like bing bong, bing 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 bing. But it's all moving pieces. No digital displays, no nothing, no circuit boards, no chips, no ROMs. But then you go to solid state, where it's referring to programming on a ROM chip. So those, they transfer a lot of the switching and relays onto circuit boards. So you're driving all your lamps with diodes and resistors like you normally would, but they're being controlled so you can get elaborate light shows, and you can get sound, and you can get music that are on cue with certain switch triggers to make the game a lot more immersive.
Yeah, it's amazing how when you open up some of these machines, what you see inside looks like when you open up a PC.
Oh yeah. Oh, easy. I mean, most people, when they see the inside and they realize that there's 6, 7 different circuit boards and probably a couple miles of wire and just stuff everywhere, they're like, I had no idea all of that was going on underneath the surface, and it's really impressive to see.
So I suppose there's a considerable amount of engineering and problem solving that goes into repairing the old pinball machines as well as the newer ones. I mean, we're talking about 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 50-year-old technology.
You become kind of like a forensic archaeologist, and it's fun because a lot of these things, there's some games that we only have. There's one out of 1,000 that were ever made, and how many of those have survived? There's not a whole lot of troubleshooting. There's not a whole lot of just YouTube how to do it. And trying to find these relics of old wiring diagrams and just problem solving and trying to think of how the designers thought. It's like, okay, well, this is broken, therefore we follow the chain up here, and you learn the order of operations of the game.
Yeah, and I suppose there's not only that, but there's a little reverse engineering that has to be done.
A little, lots of it.
And what do you do when the part just simply isn't available? How do you?
It sits in a storage unit for a long time. Actually, I had that same problem with. I have a 1986 Batman based off of the Michael Keaton film, and there's a ramp, a very long. It was a vacuum mold made ramp, and it's not something you can really easily 3D print. And no one has the mold anymore. And so you're really just kind of at the mercy of hoping that one of them turns up that someone's going to part out or salvage.
Yeah.
And that really makes it difficult for the hobby. It's the custom pieces, certain posts, certain plastics. Some of those you can 3D print, especially now that the polymers in the extruder have gotten so strong. Say even 3 years ago, you throw a steel ball bearing that's a fourth of a pound at 15 miles an hour at anything made out of a 3D printer is going to shatter. But now those things are starting to get stronger, and you're starting to see a lot more 3D printed pieces come into play.
So explain a little bit about the inside of the machine, the old mechanical pinball machine.
So the old mechanical machines, lots of wires, lots of dials, lots of relays, and lots of bells and chimes and switches. Oh God, the switches. There's so many switches because it's all switch driven. It follows it. That's the only way it knows where the ball is at. And over time, most of them are basic leaf switches in the older games. It's just 2 pieces of metal that come into contact with one another that complete a circuit. Very simple stuff. As they evolved, you get digital switches, cherry switches. You've got optic switches where you have 2, IR receivers, and if something passes between the 2, it's like, oh, I know where the ball's at. And that tells the game programming, okay, this many points, or play this noise, or whatever. And, there's so many things, but in the EM games, electromechanical, it's very simplistic on terms of what they were using, but unbelievably complex in how they made it work. I mean, we don't have a lot of EM games because we hate working on them because they break all the time, and it's just so archaic that it's hard to reverse engineer, or even yet harder to find any parts that would fit.
Yeah, but you mentioned programming.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously there's a program on these electromagnetic games, is that it? Electromechanical
There's
games.
no programming on the electromechanical games.
No programming. It's all just switches and wires
and relays.
Setting contacts and bringing them together.
That's it.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy. So unlike the new games.
The new games, whoo! So you've got you know, because it's telling a story. You've got music, you've got call outs, you've got things where it's like jackpot, you know, and it wants to reward you for good play, and elaborate light shows, and you know, you've got so many things that are going on. And you've got ROM chips. You program a small game ROM and put it on. There's usually an MPU, the brains of it, that has a, you know, there's a sound board and a power driver, and you know, that controls all the high power coils. You know, the average game is going to have 5 volts, 12 volts, and an unregulated 24 volts. And for the DMD games, which have the big fancy displays, there's going to be 100 volts to power the plasma displays. So you got a lot of power getting diverted, and it's got to go through circuit boards. And it's, you know, so many things that are moving in unison that have to require some sort of programming.
Well, it's fascinating. So really, a pinball machine does bring together science and technology and engineering, art and math, all in one.
For fun.
For fun.
For fun.
I forgot about the fun part.
It's purely for fun.
Purely for fun. No other reason than fun. And we love fun.
So do we.
So let's play some.
Let's play some games.
All right, everybody, that's it for this episode. We will talk to you again next time with another maker or tinkerer here in our community.